Welcome to Foolproof Mastery. I'm your host Patrick Razorov, and this is the space for people who are curious about everything. At Foolproof Mastery, we let the facts and knowledge do the talking, whilst teaching you how to become the best version of yourself through a plant-based lifestyle. We have regular interviews with top experts, scientists, athletes, and many more inspirational people, with some humor occasionally thrown into the mix. Foolproof Mastery will teach you how to develop yourself physically and mentally in the most foolproof way, using practical evidence-based tips and tricks for no cost. In the first part of the masterclass, we talked about the function of lipoproteins. Lipoproteins are the delivery vehicles which transport lipids, also known as fats, around the body. They transport things such as cholesterol or triglycerides for energy, although the function of the lipoprotein depends on the lipoprotein being discussed. There are several different types of lipoproteins. The lipoproteins house the lipids on the inside, and the outside is built up of phospholipids and apolipoproteins. One particular apolipoprotein, known as ApoB, in a few different types of lipoprotein, has been found to be causally related to heart disease by initiating the atherogenic process. In this part, we're going to talk a little bit more about lipid transport, how cholesterol is removed from cells, and also misconceptions with regards to HDL cholesterol. Have your notebook ready, because I've also prepared a quiz for you to test your understanding once you've listened to this podcast a few times. You can support the podcast by subscribing to the Foolproof Mastery YouTube channel and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. Hope you enjoy this podcast. Let's get into it.
Okay, so with the ApoB particles, VLDLs and LDLs, they have what we call plasma residence times. Once they leave the intestine or the liver, how long do they float around in your plasma before they are returned to the liver or intestine and catabolized? And the chylomicrons have a half-life in minutes, a plasma residence time in a couple of hours. VLDL particles coming out of the liver have a half-life of a few hours, a plasma residence time of 6 to 8 hours maybe. LDLs, once they're in circulation, have a half-life of a couple of days, a plasma residence time of up to 5 days. So if you say, wait a minute, I'm measuring ApoB, which technically is every chylomicron plus every VLDL plus every LDL, 90 to 95% of your ApoB particles are low-density lipoproteins, LDL, which is why the world is so afraid of LDL whatever nowadays. Because if you want to know who is the likely illegal dumper putting cholesterol in patients' arteries, it is the LDL. Yes, VLDLs turn out to be a big-time contributor, but particle number, not even close to LDL particle number. Chylomicrons, most of the labs don't include chylomicron ApoB into a total ApoB because it's a slightly different type of ApoB. They're very important, but their particle number matters not. So if you give an ApoB, it's kind of irrelevant with other than extreme genetic lipid disorders, what type of, how much chylomicrons or the number of chylomicrons that are floating around. So it's VLDLs and LDLs are the ApoB potentially atherogenic particles. If we could keep their physiologic concentration, meaning keep the ApoB physiologic, there would be no atherosclerotic heart disease other than some rare other things that might be going on. So they are known through Mendelian studies and tons of observational trials and tons of clinical trials that ApoB is now recognized to be the single most causal factor associated with atherosclerosis. And we do know above certain thresholds, the incidence of atherothrombotic atherosclerosis presence and atherothrombotic events starts to go through the roof. And we do know, because now we've had 30 or 40 years of those drugs I intimated about, that if we can lower the number of ApoB particles, that is right now the only lipid modulating therapy that can prevent or retard regress in some people, atherosclerosis. So ApoB becomes the ball game. A little bit about the HDLs, though, because they are a very important lipoprotein. So VLDLs are made in the liver and chylomicrons are made in the intestine. Their sole purpose in life, and why are they the biggest lipoproteins? What are they full of that makes them so big and also so buoyant? They obviously have to be full of fat if they're floating in the centrifuge. And the fat that engorges chylos and VLDLs is called triglycerides. If you don't know, triglycerides are simply a complex molecule where you take a 3-carbon glycerol backbone and you attach 3 fatty acids to it. And we have a lot of different fatty acids that can be attached to a triglyceride molecule. What is the real purpose of fatty acids? Energy. Because if you have tissues that need a lot of energy, like muscles, that because you move them, or your heart that likes to keep pumping and it needs fuel, you have to deliver fatty acids to those tissues. Now, you can't put fatty acids in the blood because they're lipids, they're insoluble. So if we could create big fat triglyceride engorged lipoproteins and release them into the plasma, their first pit stop is to make a delivery of triglycerides. So the big chylomicrons, the big VLDLs, so-called triglyceride-enriched lipoproteins, where do they go? Well, there's only one enzyme that we have that can hydrolyze triglycerides. So they have to go to tissues that can express this triglyceride hydrolyzing enzyme. The process of hydrolyzing triglycerides is called lipolysis. So where are the 2 tissues that express a lot of lipoprotein lipase that can hydrolyze the triglycerides? The fatty acids jump right into that organ. And you can imagine, as you're taking triglycerides out of a VLDL or chylomicron, it shrinks and becomes a smaller chylo or a smaller VLDL. They're called remnant lipoproteins. But that enzyme is called lipoprotein lipase, LPL. God forbid you're born with a genetic loss of function of the gene that causes transcription of the protein, lipoprotein lipase. Your triglycerides are 10, 15, 20,000. Those are little children who get pancreatitis related to their severe hypertriglyceridemia. Thank God, so rare. And it's only recently that we even have a little bit of a prayer of treating those people, other than saying they can't eat 0 fat, because then you're not going to make triglycerides if you really drop your trigs to that extreme. So what are the tissues that express lipoprotein lipase? Muscles, skeletal muscle, and myocardial muscle, because they want fuel constantly. So any triglyceride-rich lipoprotein that cruises by, it binds to the lipoprotein lipase through several mechanisms. Triglyceride hydrolysis occurs, the fatty acids scoot right into those muscles. But as you know, there's a lot of people who have decided, I'm never going to use a skeletal muscle if I don't have to. So all of a sudden, that muscle doesn't need any fuel. It's not manufacturing and expressing lipoprotein lipase. So where would a chylomicron or a VLDL full of trigs go if the muscles don't want it? The storage organ for triglycerides are adipocyte tissues. They also can express copious amounts of lipoprotein lipase. So your muscles get first choice. If they don't want the trigs that are in VLDLs or chylomicrons, your adipocyte is happy to take them and store them. They hydrolyze the trigs to fatty acids, they enter the adipocyte, and they're immediately resynthesized into triglycerides in the adipocyte for storage. If you start starving yourself and all of a sudden those muscles need energy, the triglycerides are hydrolyzed within the adipocyte. They're effluxed out of the adipocyte, bind to albumin, which takes them immediately to the muscles in the heart. So evolution has given us, we know we need energy to the muscles, but it's always good to store a little energy in adipocytes for a rainy day, so to speak. So those are the 2 systems that control your triglyceride levels. There's like 20 other steps in that hydrolysis of triglycerides, but we're not going to get into them today. So that's the purpose of a VLDL and chylomicron. Now, once the chylo and VLDL has delivered its triglycerides, mission number 1, as it shrinks, What's on the surface of a lipoprotein? Two things. There's some free cholesterol there. Most of the cholesterol is in the core of the particle. But the main component on the surface of a lipoprotein is a type of lipids called phospholipids. They're actually two fatty acids with a phosphorus moiety attached to it. Another essential crucial element to any membrane, including the surface membrane of a lipoprotein. But you can imagine as kilos and VLDL shrink, not only are they losing triglycerides, but they're going to lose a lot of surface lipids, specifically phospholipids. Now, what happens to the phospholipids when it breaks off of a kilo or VLDL? Evolution has given us a specific protein that binds phospholipids, surprisingly called phospholipid transfer protein, PLDT. So if a phospholipid garners up all the phospholipids that have been released by the VLDLs and chylomicrons, it can bring them to cells that need phospholipids. But the main place it brings them is to the only lipoprotein that is not made in the liver or in the intestine. It's self-constructed in the plasma. That lipoprotein, the protein and the intestine make a peptide, an apoprotein called apoprotein capital A-1, an alpha protein. And the liver and intestine secrete ApoA-I into the plasma. ApoA-I has such a unique helical spatial shape that it has a tremendous affinity for phospholipids and cholesterol. So as phospholipid transfer protein takes all the phospholipids off of shrinking VLDLs and chylomicrons and immediately races it over to just secreted ApoA-I and say, here you go, buddy. Now you can start evolving into a more mature HDL particle. So the first thing is ApoA-I gets what we call phospholipidated. It acquires phospholipids. And you can imagine a few more steps down the road, the ApoA-I says, I got enough phospholipids. What I'm really looking for is cholesterol. So then it starts binding to cholesterol. It's being effluxed out of whatever cell had too damn much cholesterol. And before you know it, that little helical protein ApoA-I becomes a phospholipidated ApoA-I, or basically a really immature HDL particle. And over time, now it becomes a big fat HDL particle full of cholesterol. So that's where HDL particles come from. And there's no ApoB on an HDL. So if you understand this, the ApoB particles evolved to traffic energy, triglycerides to the tissue, phospholipids to tissues, and for HDL formation. The HDLs don't want any of the triglycerides that came out of it because HDLs don't carry trigs. So they're looking for phospholipids, and the HDLs are looking for cholesterol, which they eagerly accept from the zillion cells in your body that every second of every day are saying, we got to get rid of cholesterol. Yo, HDL, come over here and accept my cholesterol that I'm trying to efflux. And that's how HDLs evolved or mature. So you can see evolution has given us quite a sophisticated, complicated lipid transportation system. It gave us the ApoB particles to deliver energy in the form of triglycerides, to give us a big balloon carrying phospholipids that are needed elsewhere. And the HDL is going to take those phospholipids and going to go acquire the cholesterol. And later on, we'll tell you what the HDL does with all that acquired cholesterol. So you can see the ApoB particles and the ApoA-I particles actually work in conjunction with each other. But let's finish this story of lipolysis, which is delivering and losing lipids. So the next question you should be asking is, okay, the chilo in the VLDL has delivered its triglycerides, it's lost a lot of its phospholipid surface, but you didn't tell me what happens to the cholesterol in the chylomicrons and the VLDLs. Remember, the cholesterol that's in chylomicrons, you absorb, that came into your intestine, and the chilos are carrying them. The VLDLs were synthesized de novo in the liver, basically full of triglycerides, but they also stuck some cholesterol in the VLDLs. So both chilos and VLDLs have substantial numbers of cholesterol molecules in them. But now I'm down to the remnants. Remnants are VLDLs and chilos that have lost triglycerides and phospholipids. Now they're basically smaller chilos and VLDLs, but still packed full of cholesterol, because the VLDs and chylose didn't deliver a single molecule of cholesterol to the muscles or the fat cells. So, what happens to those now? Still very big particles, less big because they've lost most of their triglycerides, but still substantial. Thank you, liver. The liver upregulates a receptor that is configured to grab smaller, these remnants of VLDLs and chylomicrons, and internalize them. So actually the cholesterol that's in chylose and VLDLs, if everything is working correct in your body, simply return to the liver. So what is it in the liver that grabs these chylomicron and VLDL remnants? There's a specific receptor that the liver produces. It's called the LDL receptor-related protein. LRP is the abbreviation. So if I make this LDL receptor-related protein in the liver and it sticks out, what is it on the VLDLs and the chylose that receptor binds to so it can internalize the particle? Believe it or not, now I have to teach you another surface apoprotein, Apolipoprotein E. There are multiple copies of ApoE on chylomicrons and VLDLs. You're going to find out there's no copies of ApoE for the most part on LDLs. So we'll get to that. So the liver receptor, the LRP, is looking for ApoE. Chylose and VLDLs have multiple copies of ApoE on their surface. They're cleared very rapidly. And that's why chylose and VLDLs have such short plasma residence times. Great news, because if they are cleared, where can they not go? Into your artery wall. Because even though there aren't that many of them, there's a lot of cholesterol molecules per. Average VLDL carries 8,000 molecules of cholesterol. So you wouldn't want that big baby crashing your artery wall. But if your liver is working right and you make the right type of ApoE, that liver can internalize that remnant. So it becomes basically a non-atherogenic particle as long as you don't have too many of them, or if you have defective clearance of them. It gets a little more interesting, though. As some of the VLDLs are going to the liver to be cleared, the liver expresses another enzyme on its surface, surprisingly called hepatic lipase, because the liver makes it, and it's sticking right on the surface of the liver. So some of the VLDLs, as they're about to be internalized, hepatic lipase grabs them and causes additional hydrolysis of remaining triglycerides and remaining phospholipids. That means that VLDL will not get internalized. It will shrink. As it shrinks, what does it lose? ApoE. So all of a sudden, that's a very difficult VLDL to clear. And when you shrink a VLDL by hepatic lipase, it becomes a smaller ApoB containing particle containing no ApoE anymore. And what does a small VLDL actually evolve into? A low-density lipoprotein, an LDL. Now you know how one of the ways LDLs are born. So VLDLs can be the parents of an LDL. Now, here's the problem with LDLs. There's no ApoE on it. So their plasma residence time, unlike the residence time of a VLDL, which is a few hours, the residence time of an LDL is several days. What does that tell you? It tells me evolution wanted LDLs to float around for a long time. They must have a different purpose. Sadly, everybody thinks, of course, the LDLs can then deliver the cholesterol that's inside them to wherever. Yes, that could happen, but rarely does, because most tissues are making all the cholesterol they need. Your adrenal gland don't need LDLs delivering cholesterol. Your gonads don't need it. No cell in your body needs it under standard circumstances. So there has to be a reason evolution wanted an LDL to hang around. Now, remember, when we were evolving, we had very efficient processes. No human had too many LDL particles. That's not the case today. Too many of us have way too many LDLs. So once they cross a threshold, of course, the artery wall becomes a deposition location. Now, here's why the LDLs hang around for so long. Let's go back to the HDLs. HDLs, as I hinted, are great cholesterol acceptors. So once they're phospholipidated, they can go jump on any cell that is saying, help, I'm evicting cholesterol, please take it, HDL. And the HDL shows up. Typically, it's a small HDL with a great capacity to accept cholesterol molecules. And it says, I'm here, efflux your cholesterol out. The specific transporter, ABCA1, ATP binding cassette transporter A1, effluxes the cholesterol. The little baby HDL accepts it. And over a very short time, that HDL acquires more and more cholesterol and becomes mature, becomes a big, fat, large HDL, cholesterol-enriched particle. There's an intermediary step that's maybe beyond today's discussion. The cholesterol has to be esterified first, so it migrates to the core of the HDL. But now imagine, all right, now I've got these big, fluffy HDL particles full of cholesterol. Obviously, that HDL has to get rid of that cholesterol. It doesn't stay forever in your blood in an HDL. So what are the avenues that an HDL can lose its cholesterol load? Everybody was taught, oh, the HDL just runs right back to the liver and dumps it. That's reverse cholesterol transport. Well, I'm here to tell you that's one avenue of reverse cholesterol transport. The second avenue, HDLs can return to the enterocytes and dump off their cholesterol. That's called transintestinal cholesterol efflux, TICE, T-I-C-E. Google it. So HDLs, first two steps, bring it to the liver, bring it to the small intestine. They would delipidate the HDL of cholesterol. That HDL becomes a little baby weensy HDL, which can now scoop back to cells and acquire more cholesterol. Yay. What's the next avenue for an HDL to get rid of its cholesterol? I've taught you already that adipocytes are major storage organs for triglycerides. Actually, they're major lipid storage organs, and adipocytes are a major reserve of cholesterol storage. So an HDL can cruise by an adipocyte, which has a receptor capable of delipidating an HDL. And the adipocyte says, I'm just going to steal some of the cholesterol and save it for a rainy day. That's called the scavenger receptor B1, SRB1. So the HDL can deliver cholesterol to an adipocyte. Well, would you call that reverse cholesterol transport? I wouldn't. When it was first discovered, an author called it lateral cholesterol transport because it wasn't going back to the liver or even the intestine. All right, avenue 3. Now, you do know, I've said it enough times, that our gonads in our adrenal cortex do require cholesterol. They make a lot of it. But if they need to acquire cholesterol from the plasma, they also express that scavenger receptor B1, which can grab big HDLs, suck cholesterol out of the HDLs, which they can then transform into a hormone. So if you think gonadal tissue and adrenal cortical tissue needs a delivery of cholesterol, yes, they do, but it's supplied by HDLs, not LDLs primarily. So, wow. And by the way, even if you have an HDL cholesterol of 20, that's more than enough cholesterol in an HDL to keep an adrenal cortex or gonad happy. So you don't have to worry, oh my God, my HDL-C is low, I'm going to hurt those steroidogenic tissues. You're not. And LDL-C has no relationship to it. All right, is there another avenue for an HDL to get rid of its cholesterol? It is, and it's a major avenue that people unfortunately don't know about. So if I'm a big fat HDL full of cholesterol, and I know the liver and maybe the intestine is my ultimate destination, could I save myself a damn trip back to the liver? Yes. If you could just get somebody to say, hey, HDL, I'll take your cholesterol and I'll deliver it to the liver or intestine. And that is our ApoB particles. So when a HDL full of cholesterol bumps into an ApoB containing particle, which always has more triglycerides than an HDL, which has basically none, there is an exchange of core lipids. Our body actually makes a lipid transfer protein, cholesterol ester triglyceride transfer protein. So those particles exchange one molecule of cholesterol ester for one molecule of triglyceride. So the HDL full of cholesterol says, yo, LDL, which is, of course, the most numerous ApoB particle, would you please take my cholesterol? And the LDL says, surely, But to make room for it, I'm going to give you some triglycerides. So with this process of CETP-mediated exchange of what are called neutral lipids, triglycerides and cholesterol ester, the HDL gets depleted of cholesterol, enriched in triglycerides, but the LDL gets depleted of triglycerides and acquires more cholesterol. So wait a minute. Did the good cholesterol just become bad? This shows you the idiocy of using the terms good and bad cholesterol, because so much cholesterol leaves the HDL, goes to the LDLs. Now, the LDL has two options. It could go dump it in your artery wall. Well, that wouldn't be good. Or the LDL can return it to the liver, where the liver has a major league receptor that is sticking out at most times and will grab the LDL particles and internalize them. That's called an LDL receptor. The LRP grabs the ApoE on the chylos and VLDLs. The LDL receptor binds to the ApoB, it's called the ApoB 100, on the LDL particles and internalizes it. And then the liver catabolizes the LDL particle. So I tease doctors or anybody. What would you call the process of an LDL accepting cholesterol from an HDL, but then returning it to the liver? I would say it looks to me like the LDLs are a major component in the reverse cholesterol transport system. They are. Here's the new terminology. When an HDL brings cholesterol back to the liver, that's called direct reverse cholesterol transport. When an LDL, which got substantial cholesterol from an HDL, returns it to the liver, that's called indirect reverse cholesterol transport. Total reverse cholesterol transport is the sum of indirect plus direct. So now I think if you put two and two together, you can figure, Tom, I think you just explained why evolution let an LDL circulate for 3 to 5 days. It gives it plenty of time to accept cholesterol from the HDL particles that are trying to get rid of it. And again, we have a great picture of the lipid transportation system mediated by all of the lipoproteins that work harmoniously together. And if you could understand all those processes, you're done. You know everything you need to know about lipids and lipoproteins. The problem is, do we have any metrics I can test on you to tell me how efficient your lipids are delivering lipids or returning lipids to the liver or intestine or your gonads or the adipose? Zero. All I have is some static measurements, how much cholesterol is in the various ApoB or HDL particles in all of the particles, total cholesterol, how much cholesterol is in an HDL, does an LDL-C and an LDL cholesterol level, an HDL cholesterol level, even a VLDL cholesterol tell you anything about these complex dynamic processes? At best, you might make a guess, and that guess would be wrong 50% or more of the time. So unfortunately, the lipid concentrations that everybody is overthinking too damn much tells you nothing about these complex dynamic processes involved with lipid utilization and transportation. Nothing you measure in the blood tells you what might be going on in your central nervous system. So there are other things that might tell us that, but it's not measuring anything in the lipid profile, not even measuring ApoB. So the brain is just another little organ system. We can concentrate, thank God, in the peripheral blood because they are the carriers of the particles that can be atherogenic, the ApoB particles. So I have to quantitate ApoB particles using cholesterol concentrations. They're weak, but they do it. Better yet, particle numbers, which are available via different methodologies. And those are the most accurate ways to predict, especially early in life, who is at risk ultimately for atherothrombosis. And then, God, if they're above the levels that I'm uncomfortable with, that studies have told us you're in potentially big trouble, what lifestyle and pharmacological therapies do I have if I need to restore your ApoB levels closer to the physiologic ranges? And so that's it. That's why lipoproteins are so crucial to this story. But, you know, it's a complex story. I joke that it took me 30 years to understand all this, but my skill is like I'm doing with you in a half hour or an hour as a little podcast to try and dumb it down so you can have some comprehension of, yes, this is a hell of a lot more complex than I thought. But basically, it's going to come back to ApoB levels in the blood. And if I'm not doing ApoB, the laboratory metrics that correlate the most with ApoB would be your LDL cholesterol, or better yet, something called your non-HDL cholesterol level. Whew. All right. Next question.
Yeah, my dad, he does his lipids panel, and when last time he came back very happy, he said, yeah, my HDL is very high. I've got my good cholesterol is very good. So all of what you just told me means that's a false friend.
Yes, but let me say, it did take us many years to come to that understanding. The first trials that sort of came out where they were measuring lipids and following populations for how many heart attacks. In the United States, it was the Framingham Study, where in a section of Massachusetts, mostly in Caucasians, they were saying, here's the lipid profile. Who the heck, after many years, gets heart attacks or atherosclerotic heart disease? And they noticed that people who had high total cholesterol or high LDL cholesterol were getting a lot of heart attacks. But a major league risk factor is, God, the people who had low levels of HDL cholesterol were really getting a lot of heart attacks. So all of a sudden, the world knew, we really just have to measure. You could screen with total cholesterol, but you'd want to fine tune it with LDL cholesterol because that's the major particle crashing the artery wall. But if for whatever reason their HDL is deficient in cholesterol, that brings risk beyond whatever an LDL metric tells you about risk. So that was the belief. Now, remember, that was an epidemiologic study, which was just correlating this metric or that metric with the incidence of a disease. But from that, everybody said, oh, God, all I have to do is lower LDL cholesterol, or better yet, raise HDL cholesterol. Because it seems like in Framingham, the people who had higher HDL cholesterol levels had less heart attacks. Hence the name good cholesterol, hence the name bad cholesterol. Any cholesterol is in the yellow. At that time, we had no idea that these particles are exchanging their core lipids all day long. We didn't realize how an HDL became deficient in cholesterol. So there we go. So that led to clinical trials. Once pharma understood the observational data, they said, God, if we invent a drug that can lower ApoB, LDL cholesterol, it'll probably work. And the first drug that they came up with that did that were the bile acid sequestrants, specifically cholestyramine. It binds to cholesterol in your gut, you excrete it, so you deny the liver a source of cholesterol. The liver makes more of those LDL receptors that clears your ApoB particles. ApoB goes down, LDL cholesterol goes down. Those people have less heart attacks over several years. Bingo! Unfortunately, from that, pharma said, that's it. We're just going to, for the next 30 years, develop one more potent LDL-lowering drug after another. Turns out that was good, but they ignored every other lipid in the blood because of that. But deep down, they started to learn, God, even if we use the therapies that are evolving to lower LDL cholesterol, there's still a lot of heart attacks in the people who have low HDL cholesterol. So, God, if we could only get a therapy that raises HDL cholesterol, that would be part 2 of your lipid therapeutics. And actually, at that time, we had 2 drugs that raised HDL cholesterol, niacin and the fibric acid class of lipid modulating drugs. It took about 20 years to put them through clinical trials, but it turns out the ways that niacin and fibrates raise HDL cholesterol have no effect on cardiovascular outcomes. And those were the early trials that started to making us doubt, well, maybe low HDL cholesterol can be used as a risk factor, but under no circumstances should it ever be used as a goal of therapy. And there has never been a single lipid guideline produced by any organization that ever gave us an HDL-C goal of therapy, and still don't. Now it's pretty much ignored therapeutically because we know, at least so far, the drugs that have raised HDL cholesterol have no cardiovascular benefit. That may well change as the future goes on with different classes of drugs, but you can see how we got tripped into that. And only Father Time and continued trials makes us be smarter as time goes on. So your dad was told your HDL cholesterol is high, therefore you're protected. We now know that's utter nonsense. The reason his HDL cholesterol is high is because it's probably not being delipidated, and the cholesterol is retaining its cholesterol. And that means it's not really going back to where it should be going, the liver into LDLs or back to the intestine. So, and we now also know from any number of studies that at a certain point, cholesterol overloaded HDLs become what we call dysfunctional and actually contribute to atherosclerosis. So never, ever tell a single patient that I'm not worried about you because your HDL cholesterol is high. They might have decent risk. They might be at terrible risk. The only thing right now that you can measure in lipids that defines risk is ApoB, or the ApoB-related lipid metrics, LDL cholesterol, non-HDL cholesterol. As a distant third, triglycerides often correlates with ApoB, but not so explicitly as do LDL-C and non-HDL-C. So it's an old, and the real tragedy of doctors believing, including me, I believed it too for the longest while, that having high HDL cholesterol is good. What is the segment of our population that has the highest HDL cholesterol levels? Women. Men in general have, and it's due to reproductive hormones, men have lower HDL cholesterol. And we've known for a long while that men do get more heart attacks than women. We also know women still get a hell of a lot of heart attacks, so you never dismiss a woman, and you work her up very aggressively and treat her as aggressively as you would a man. But women have higher HDL cholesterol. So no wonder women get less heart attacks because they have, and it was just another total fallacy that has not been borne out over time. But as you probably know, androgens suppress ApoA-I and increase HDL catabolism. That's why men have slightly lower HDL cholesterol levels. So that's the problem. So women were told you're protected because your HDL cholesterol is high. Before you ever tell a single human being that they are protected because their HDL-C is high, please measure ApoB. And if that's high, say, we don't care about your HDL cholesterol. We have to, through lifestyle or if needed drugs, get your ApoB to the level where it can no longer crash your artery wall. So that's where this good and bad cholesterol stuff comes from. There are a couple of drugs in progress that may change, at least if you use that particular drug and you raise HDL cholesterol, it may work. And we know that drug is coming. It's a now being investigated CETP inhibitor called obicetrapib. And even though it triples your HDL cholesterol level, it dramatically lowers your ApoB level. So I believe it's going to turn out that who cares that drug raises HDL cholesterol? It's going to save your life because it lowers ApoB. So we'll see. They just started phase 3 trials.
Thanks a lot for tuning in. The next part of the Heart Disease Masterclass of Dr. Tom Dayspring will focus on the different types of heart disease medication. We hope that you find the supplementary quiz useful. You can use it to check your knowledge. You can find it in the description to the video on YouTube and also in the podcast description wherever you're listening to this episode. You can support Foolproof Mastery by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. This will really do wonders to help spread the word and get out the educational material to as many people as possible. Remember to keep on living every day to the maximum. Take care. Ciao.